Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation podcast, where we discuss the exciting innovations that lie ahead for organizational ground transportation. Each episode, we cover topics tailored to those resolving transportation-related challenges and provide tips, tools, and trends that will inspire you to stay ahead of the curve. And now, here's your host, Daniel Perez.
Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation. Today we have a really exciting guest, Bill Russo, founder and CEO of Automobility. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being generous with your time. So let's dive into it. Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Automobility. What is it that you guys do?
Okay, cool. Well, I started my career as an engineer, working in product and manufacturing engineering at IBM, working in the chip manufacturing business. Later spent over a decade at Chrysler. They brought me to China 21 years ago, and there I saw firsthand how globalization was transforming the automotive industry, that it was, supply chains were moving toward markets that could scale technology. And I pivoted into a technology orientation. I had been, as I said early in my career, in the chip manufacturing business. I was also trained as a business transformation consultant at IBM. I had a stint while I was in China at Harman International, and that was about 10 years ago. And then I founded this company 8 years ago, Automobility. We're a strategy consulting and investment advisory firm. And today, my focus is on helping global players navigate this massive shift that's happening in the industry toward electric, connected, and autonomous mobility, with a special focus on China as the world's largest mobility market and an innovation hub of significant scale.
Got it. Got it. So, Bill, you mentioned you started in China 21 years ago. Bring us back a little bit. Like, how was it back then versus how it is nowadays?
Yeah, well, first of all, kind of why my lens was calibrated to this market. It's the world's largest by far. It wasn't that way 21 years ago, in terms of mobility and automotive in particular. Automobiles were not, certainly up until the turn of this century, were not the primary mode of individual transportation. It was two-wheeled transportation, scooters, bicycles, public transportation dominated. And I watched over the course of that 21-year period, the industry grow from a follower, where it was about, at the turn of the century, about 1 million units of automobiles were produced a year in China, to today it's over 30 million. And all of the growth of the 21st century automotive industry has been in China this century, all of the incremental growth that's occurred. And I've always been fascinated about how transportation uh, shapes the economic development of the country. If you think to the great economies of the world over the course of a millennium of history, dating back to the period of Age of Discovery, the Viking period, those nations that could master mobility were the ones that led the economic development of the world, right? They were the leading economies of the world, whether it was the Dutch or the British, to now the 20th century, the United States. The ability to deploy and innovate around mobility, whether it be on the land with the automobile, in the air with with airframe, whether it's space travel, the idea of your economic development being linked in large part to your ability to innovate around mobility has always been true. And coming into the 21st century, watching the development of China move from this 1 million unit a year in automotive consumption to now today, they're over 30 million units with the most modern high-speed rail network on the planet, with modern road infrastructure. And, these are the vectors that I think we need to focus on if we're going to develop into a leading economy. So I'm observing China. I'm helping people understand how technology commercialization happens there, how public and private partnerships, government engagement, and policy making and support for the acceleration of the commercialization of these technologies. It's a very special place when it comes to putting all those ingredients together.
Got it. Thank you, Bill. So as we go into this new phase of mobility, what are you mainly excited about?
Well, there's a lot. First of all, I think what a lot of people tend to fixate on, and I think this is kind of guided by the way the media cover the story about China, is they tend to overemphasize the geopolitical challenge and underemphasize the idea of how mobility problem solving should be approached. First of all, having less history, having less legacy has given China a decided advantage. They're not playing a defensive game trying to protect legacy industries. They're actually playing a more offense game of, how do I reimagine transportation? How do I reimagine how mobility can be served to the population? And more people still today ride than drive in China. It's still a market where uh, there are fewer people that own and operate their own transportation equipment than are served by mobility. So it offers some unique opportunities to innovate around serving mobility to the population. And that's not just in the form of human movement. It's also in the form of goods delivery. It's also in the form of services, access to services. Many places in places like China are not, the cities were not designed to be easy to navigate, right? So the mobility problem solving aided by technology is a significant accelerant. It's significantly uh, addressing a pain point of very dense populations, very urbanized mobility problem solving. And in a place like that, where you've got, I think a population of people who have been introduced to smart device technology through the app-based economy that gives people access to convenient app-based services, you have an opportunity for commercialization in a different manner than that which was served by companies that were born in the 20th century, where these technology solutions didn't exist. So I find that an interesting place to be, to observe how those ingredients can come together to really challenge the conventional paradigms that have been put in place for over a century now regarding how to access mobility.
Got it. So when it comes to the actual consumers, what do you think is going to continue to shift in the next 10 years? At the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned there's going to be less utilization. So like how do you foresee sort of the actual consumers of the words, like either mobilizing themselves, or is it more on the sharing, um ride shares, or like how do you foresee sort of that horizon?
Yeah. It's a multimodal way to think. I think of this, first of all, we don't, i- when you grow up in an environment where habits are formed not only over one generation, but over several. If we think about, I'm an American, so I grew up in a world where my father and grandfather had a vehicle. That's not the case in emerging economies, especially places like China. You're pretty much dealing with people who are introduced to new ways of solving their day-to-day problems, which now, today, in the 21st century, we're able to access services through apps. We're able to unlock convenient ways of getting our daily, and think about the things we do every day. We eat every day, we shop, we move around. Those are the everyday services. Those are increasingly now available through platform solutions providers. Um, yes, we still own, and many people do, more so than certainly was a generation ago in China. More people choose to own, but it's not the majority. It's still the minority. And the majority of movements every day are being served through platforms. And that's really the paradigm shift that unlocks this future of uh, connected, electric, and autonomous mobility. because when you serve mobility through an app-based ecosystem, the economics of that movement are not hinged on an infrequently used platform of hardware. It's about, how do I monetize the movement? How do I minimize the cost of that movement? How do I aggregate data associated with those movements and then use that to create a whole new business model about how to solve the consumer-based demand for serving mobility to the population. And again, places like China that have not been doing this for a century have a cleaner approach to the problem solving. And one of the things we tend to underestimate is the power of the internet economy. The internet economy's presence in the value chain of mobility is a unique aspect of the way the solutions are being built in China. So you've got the likes of companies like Huawei, Xiaomi, Tencent, Alibaba, Baidu, all with a dog in the hunt. You don't have that outside of China. You have Google, you had Apple, but Apple pulled away. You don't have the same technology. You have Tesla, but at the heart of it, having the world's largest internet economy engaged in directly in the mobility solutions problem solving, that is a unique aspect of China that doesn't get a lot of attention when people talk about these developments.
So that's a really interesting point. So what do you think is the underlying factor that is separating China versus other countries? You mentioned obviously the internet economy, but is it the infrastructure they have developed? Is it smarter roads? What do you think it is at the same time?
Well, you know, we're dealing with two worlds that coexist. You've got the legacy uh, manufacturing centered business that has been developed and has matured to a ripe old age, powered by combustion engines. I mean, that is the automotive industry ex China. That was the automotive industry before China came on the scene. Yes, there were disruptors who challenged the paradigm of how mobility problem solving could be done. The 140-year, the combustion engine powered vehicle was invented in the 1880s. It's a 19th century innovation. We're still powering the majority of movement, whether it's on land and in air, with combustion engine, fuel. We're still using that as our primary way of moving things. Um, that's not sustainable. We know that. That business of how we move things has to be challenged. But the manufacturers of the equipment who profit from the status quo were never motivated to make a shift. And the motivation doesn't happen with instant profitability. We're not talking about a world where profits happen the second you decide to flip a switch. They're deeply rooted engineering cultures. There's deeply rooted brand identities. You've got supply chains that are built around a particular type of product. None of that moves easily, and it does require a bit of policy support. California did that. That created the opportunity for a company like Tesla to be able to generate enough profit in a transitional stage before they could scale their product. But when China came on the scene, it changed the whole nature of how to think about putting the pieces of this puzzle together. It wasn't just the fact that China promoted the electrified vehicle, but they also had, without government creation of anything, they also had the world's biggest mobile internet economy. And the mobile internet is what triggers the acceleration of the technology development in connected car and in autonomous movement, because it's that economy that understands where the profits can be improved by making cars less dependent on humans and more automated, right? Cars don't have to be bound by the 8-hour a day shift of an individual worker that actuate the vehicle. If you can turn the car into a robot and make it or a vehicle, I shouldn't say car, a mobility device. If you can turn a mobility device, land or or air, doesn't matter what form. If you can turn those into 24/7, ideally, you still have to charge them. But if you could turn them into moving all the time, then you've increased the utilization, you've decreased the cost per mile traveled, and you open up a whole new economy around efficient. Really, the circulatory system of the economy is mobility. The circulatory system of any economy is the ability to move people and goods. And making that more efficient is the task that I think traditional hardware companies are not they're not about. They're about selling units. They're about selling more and more product. The services economy is about decreasing the cost of operation, decreasing the cost so that the utility is in the monetization of the movement. So I think that's what China is doing more so than any other place on the planet, because it happens to be the place that can scale these technologies and has the world's biggest mobile internet economy that's pulling for all of this.
Got it. That is so well said. So I really appreciate your nuggets of wisdom there. So if you had a crystal ball, what will be the acceptance? How long will it take for consumers to accept autonomous vehicles? What will be the best way to implement this across the US? What is your forecast when it comes to implementing autonomous vehicles within the US, if you had to guess?
Yeah, well, a great question, and it's already highly accepted in places like China. It is, there was a study done recently that 72% of surveyed adults in China trust AI versus 32% in the United States, according to Edelman Trust. So yes, there's already, I think, the consumers in China are already favorable toward and actually demand to have products even when they do consume individual ownership, they want technology, smart vehicle technology, including autonomous driving. 85% of Chinese consumers said they were comfortable with autonomous driving that doesn't require human supervision, compared with less than 40% of US consumers. We have been trained, and I think part of it is because the way we regulate things, we're trained to think technology is to be feared, even the way we talk about AI. Oh, we've got this idea that Terminator scenario is likely to happen. Um, Now, that kind of slows down the rate at which we experiment with new technologies. Even though we invent the technologies, US is very good at creating the technology, but at mass commercialization, we tend to fall down. There's no reason in the world why we don't have a high-speed rail network other than we can't figure out how to get equipment like that deployed without massive investment, overly regulated environments. We don't experiment with the technology, and we rely on traditional industries who profit from the status quo to be the pace setters. They're not. They're not the pace setters. You need breakthrough companies. You need more Teslas. You don't need one, you need a dozen of them. And maybe you only need two or three in the end, but you need a bunch of them to break out and set the pace of the race, because the old horse is just not fast enough.
Hmm. So, what about let's switch gears a little bit for a second from the autonomous to electrical vehicles. What is your perspective with electrical vehicles and where we are and where we're going?
Yeah, again, electric vehicles make sense only if you have the if infrastructure to support it and you can make them cost competitive relative to whatever they're replacing. Cost competitive TCO. In other words, you're going to save money on gas. I mean, anybody who owns a plug-in hybrid or an EV knows they're not spending as much money on fuel.
Yep.
And what you're going to find out is they're not going to break as much because they don't have as much mechanical, points of failure as a traditional car. I just took in the US, I don't have an EV. I would love to own one. They're just too damn expensive. I have a car and I took it in for an oil change today. You don't have to do that with an EV. And I'm fueling it up too frequently and I'm spending way too much money on gas. So public acceptance is about infrastructure. Why didn't I buy an EV in the US? Well, I'm not here most of the time, and I didn't want a technology product that requires care and feeding to be sitting in my garage without getting charged regularly. I know if I don't charge my electronics regularly, eventually the batteries turn into a brick. Uh, but if you're an everyday user and you move around frequently, you're going to find you're going to save a lot of money, but you're going to probably be concerned about infrastructure, which is going to be the hardest, hill for you to climb in making the purchase decision toward an EV. What you're going to need though is you're going to need to make the product rival in cost. You need to democratize, right? To get mass acceptance of a product, it needs to compete on price with whatever it's replacing. And that's certainly happened in China. The EVs in China, that you can get a very low priced, between 5 and 25,000 USD equivalent. You get a reasonably good quality. The more you pay, the better the quality will be. Vehicle, you got very good quality BYD products available for under 10,000 US dollars, which is crucial to getting consumers to jump in to the market. But they even have more sophisticated cars, all priced somewhere between 25 and 50,000 US, which is below the average price of a car in the United States, that have this whole ecosystem of digital services. Brands like Xiaomi, Huawei, Li Auto, companies that people in the US have never heard of. Maybe they've heard of Xiaomi, but they're technology companies delivering electric vehicles and extended range EVs at very competitive prices. So if you're going to get consumers to shop for and experiment with these technologies, you got to address both the infrastructure problem and the cost of the product. China makes 2/3 of 2024 numbers, and those numbers are higher, even higher this year. 2/3 of all, they make 1 out of every 3 cars made in the world is made in China today. 2 out of every 3 electric vehicles are made in China, and more than 70% of the EV batteries are made in China.
Wow.
I'm not saying China has the permanent edge on winning the race to the future, but I'm saying if we want to compete in the future of mobility, we're going to have to find ways to bring some of those capabilities to the rest of the world.
Yeah, especially with this new changes of the new administration, it seems like they put a pause on a lot of the development. And I know that in the bus industry, your typical electrical bus, when you mention about being competitive, your typical bus that we normally acquire for our clients is about, let's just say, at $500,000. But when it comes to electrical motor coaches, it's about $1.5 million. So everybody wants it, but no one wants to pay the price, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yep.
And then we have to deal with the uncertainty of, is it really going to work? Um, the repairs and maintenance, that we have the infrastructure. So I feel like everybody wants to head in that direction, but there's still so much headway to made up there to be able to implement it.
Yeah,
Um,
part of it is we've again relied on traditional industry to be to carry the flag. Tesla wasn't a traditional player. The reason why they broke through is because they were taking the problem in a solving the problem in a different way, with policy backing, ZEV mandates, you know, cafe credits. All of those were ways for getting the process moving in a direction where a company like that could rise. Problem is, you've only got one state that really drove that, California, and you don't have a federal system top down that's driving the pace of the commercialization of the next generation of mobility tech. We did in the 20th century. The United States had public-private partnership. The rails were not built by private industries only. It was a lot of government backing. Uh, a lot of the automotive industry relied on, the fueling infrastructure, road infrastructure to be deployed. A lot of that was government investment. The whole interstate highway system was a federal program led by Dwight Eisenhower after World War II, after he saw how efficient the Germans could move things around during the war. So yes, we've had periods in our history, even the space program, right? That was NASA. That was John Kennedy saying, we're going to go to the moon. The idea that this has all got to be done by private industry, no, you got to have a star on the horizon. You got to have a target, and you got to recognize that mobility innovation is the backbone for the advancement of civilization and is the circulatory system of the economy. If you don't prioritize that, if you leave it, here's how I would summarize it. The mobility industry in the United States is a rust belt industry. The mobility industry in China is a high-tech industry. And that's the fundamental difference of why the US is falling behind in its ability to compete.
Let's go. That's wealth of wisdom right there. Let's transition to what is the best business advice you ever gotten so far, Bill?
Uh, I was inspired to come to China before it became such a disruptor. The best business advice was when I quit my job at Chrysler, staying in China. Up until I quit my job at Chrysler in 2008 because I felt the pace of innovation and the future of mobility was largely going to be set by emerging markets, in particular China. China was and to a great degree, even though it's grown, is still has the attitude of a playing offense, right? An emerging market doesn't have a legacy to protect. Therefore, it's more it will eventually get a legacy, and the legacy it will probably slow it down. But I see the Western world putting fences around its legacy industry in the form of tariffs, and I see China playing a different game. And here's what's going to happen: the Western world, and by that I should say the mature market world. That includes Japan and Korea, where the automotive industry still has its strengths. The the emerging world is much bigger than just those places. Europe, European Union, United States, and Japan and Korea. That was kind of the triad markets as we described it in the automotive industry. Everywhere else is fair game, and everywhere else includes the global South, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America. And guess what those economies demand? Affordable transportation. Guess what those economies share with China? More riders than drivers. Whose mobility problem-solving approach is more suited for all of the emerging world? China's is. So the best advice that I got from my mentors was go to China, but understand what its role will be in the 21st century, and that's kind of what I've been living on for the past 17 years.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And then, what is your best book recommendations that has the biggest impact on your life, Bill?
Oh, there's so many I could pick from, but Clayton Christensen's, you know, The Innovator's Dilemma, how we get stuck and we don't challenge, traditional industries failed to challenge themselves. Lou Gerstner's book, Teaching the Elephant to Dance. I worked at IBM early in my career. He is the guy who came in and recognized that the hardware-centric business model needed to be blown up and transformed into a services-centric business model. I think that's exactly the problem the automotive industry, the mobility industry of the 20th century has, is they tend to think of themselves in terms of units sold, not clients served. It's becoming a utility business. You need to learn how to profit from the utility of the platform, which is why I called my company Automobility, because you shouldn't be calling yourself automotive, because automotive is hardware. Automobility is the utility that comes from the hardware. That's what you should be thinking about as an industry. How do I monetize the car at birth, not how do I monetize the car at death, right? They think of the car as a piece of metal that's profited from after at the factory. You should be thinking about how do I maximize its utility in its life as a mobility device. If you had that in your scope of business, you'd think differently. And again, the other one would be Walter Isaacson. You can't mess with him. Steve Jobs, right? I think Apple's, the existence of a company like Apple that pioneered the whole smart device, first the personal computer industry, but then the mobile device industry. The mobile internet exists because of the vision of a company like that, of that individual who led that company and transformed it into a mobility platform company. we need to learn that that needs to become more of a ubiquitous way of thinking about products and services.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. And Bill, I forgot to ask you, what are your thoughts when it comes to flying vehicles? Yeah.
Part of the problem solving. Yeah, it's just another multimodal mobility problem solving, right? The the third dimension is the air, and we have that in the form of uh, large form factor, but small form factor mobility that will unlock a whole new way of delivering value. Both people and goods movement can be served much more directly without having to deal with hubs and spoke types of transportation. When you've got the access to VTOL, the flexibility of mobility unlocks a whole, there's a lot of the world you'll never see because you can only go to the places where the roads can take you to. In the vertical dimension, and the same is true for airplanes because they can only go to the big hub, the airfield. There's a lot of the world that the drones can get to. There's a lot of places you can see, and I kind of had that experience when I was in Hawaii on my honeymoon 15 years ago, where the pilot said, "You're going to see parts of the world that the 80% of the world that you're never going to see when you limit yourself to the roads. I'm going to show you in a helicopter all the places that you'd never be able to see otherwise." And I think drone-based travel will allow us to get to more places, will unlock more value. Land value is a function of access to the place. So I think it's going to unlock a whole new economy.
Hmm. Perfect. Well, I wanted to thank you, Bill, for your time, for sharing so much wisdom in this podcast. For all the listeners that are listening to you, how can they stay in touch with you? And if you could just like reiterate a little bit about what Automobility does too, so that way users could contact you as well.
Sure. Yeah, we're a strategy and investment advisory firm. Our business is helping clients understand and how to think about and profit from the future of mobility. Those clients can be automotive or other mobility form factors. Obviously, that automotive is where my core is. I also work with startups and helping them with fundraising and business development. I've sat on the advisory board and on the board of companies from all over the world. I'm not just focused on China, but China happens to be my learning lab where you can see things happen faster, where there's far more degrees of freedom on how to think about the future. If you want to reach us, I'm on LinkedIn. Bill Russo is just search for me there. I'm also website is www.automobility.io.
Perfect. All right. Again, Bill, thank you so much for being generous with your time. It was a pleasure having you in this podcast. And for all the rest of the listeners, stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you so much.
Daniel.
Thank you, Bill.
See ya.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the episode and got some valuable insights. If you're curious to learn more, head over to the resource website at dpvtransportation.com, where we got a ton of useful resources and tools for you to stay ahead of the game. And before we wrap it up, I want to invite you to book a free gas emission consultation or a consultation about your ground transportation program with us. Just register on our website. Is a fantastic way to see how your fleet is doing or how your overall program could be improved. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on the future of ground transportation. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the future of ground transportation. We appreciate you coming along for the ride. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more, please make sure to subscribe to the show.